Leona Vasquez stood at the edge of the river, watching the muddy water flow past. The Amazon was alive around her, birds calling, insects humming, leaves rustling in the heavy air. She felt peace here, even when storms rolled in or when the heat became unbearable. This was her home. For years she had worked here as a wildlife rescuer and conservationist, protecting endangered animals and helping local tribes care for their land. To her, outsiders meant trouble. Companies came with big machines, promises, and money, and always left behind destruction. So when she learned that a new team of engineers was arriving to build a bridge through the rainforest, she felt her chest tighten. She promised herself she would never work with them. They didn't belong here. When the team arrived, the sound of engines replaced the quiet songs of the forest. Trucks rolled in carrying metal and equipment. Among the group was a tall man wearing a faded cap and work boots. His name was David Cole. He wasn't loud like the others. He spoke softly and took his time looking at the surroundings before doing anything. But that didn't change what he was, an outsider, one of them. Leona met him on the first day. She had come to tell the crew they were too close to a nesting site for macaws. David was measuring ground levels when she called out sharply, "You can't build here. There's a nest just behind that tree line." David turned and looked at her. "We're following the plan we were given," he said calmly. "Your plan will destroy their home," she replied, anger rising in her voice. He paused, as if thinking carefully before answering. "I'll talk to my supervisor," he said. "Maybe we can move it a few meters, but that only made her angrier." "A few meters? You don't understand this land. You never will." She walked away before he could say anything more. The humidity clung to her skin as she headed back toward her camp. She could hear the men's laughter behind her, the clang of tools, the groan of engines. Each sound felt like a wound to the forest she loved. For the next few days, Leona avoided them. Her small team continued their work, tracking injured animals, recording plant growth, and checking traps meant to capture poachers. At night, she wrote reports under the light of a small lantern. But even as she tried to ignore the engineers, she often caught glimpses of David. Sometimes she saw him helping a local worker fix a machine. Sometimes he stood by the river sketching something in a notebook. Once, she even saw him stop the others from cutting down a tree where monkeys were nesting. It confused her. He didn't act like the others. One afternoon, her assistant Rosa came running into the camp. "They're having trouble at the bridge site," she said. "The foundation is sinking," Leona sighed. "Good," she muttered. "Maybe they'll stop," but Rosa shook her head. "No, Leona. If the structure collapses into the river, it could block the water flow. It will flood the animals' habitats." That made Leona's stomach twist. Against her will, she found herself walking toward the construction site. When she arrived, she saw chaos. The rain from the past few nights had softened the ground. A part of the temporary bridge had tilted dangerously toward the water. Workers shouted instructions. David stood in the middle of it all, his clothes soaked in mud. He was trying to secure a rope around a support beam. When he saw her, he nodded quickly but said nothing. Leona wanted to turn back to prove she didn't care, but she couldn't. Instead, she grabbed a rope and helped tie down the loose end near the shore. When the danger passed, David approached her. His face was tired, but there was a quiet gratitude in his eyes. "Thank you," he said simply. Leona didn't answer. She just nodded and walked away. That night, the rain returned. The sound of thunder rolled through the forest like drums. Leona sat in her tent, writing her notes. But her thoughts kept drifting back to the bridge, to the men working through the storm, and to David. She remembered the way he had looked at the trees, the way he had spoken, not arrogant, not careless. Maybe he wasn't like the others, she thought. Then she shook her head. No, it didn't matter. He was still part of the project destroying her land. Over the next few days, the tension between the conservation team and the engineers grew. Leona filed a formal complaint to the company's headquarters, asking them to halt the construction until further studies were done. David didn't confront her about it, but she could feel his eyes on her whenever they crossed paths. One morning, she found a note pinned to the tree outside her tent. It was from him. The handwriting was neat and steady. "Dr. Vasquez, I understand your concerns. I've been here long enough to see what you're trying to protect. I don't agree with everything my company does either, but maybe we can find a way to make both sides work." Leona read it twice, then folded it and kept it in her pocket. She didn't reply. She didn't know what to say. That evening, the sky turned red with the coming storm. The air felt heavy and strange. The local guides warned that the river would rise again. Leona checked her camp, secured the food supplies, and moved her notes into waterproof bags. But something inside her felt uneasy, like a quiet voice telling her that something bad was about to happen. She looked toward the direction of the bridge, a faint line of metal and wood visible between the trees. Against her better judgment, she decided to check it one last time before dark. She took her flashlight, put on her raincoat, and walked through the wet jungle path. The sound of thunder grew louder as she reached the riverside. The bridge lights flickered in the distance. Workers were still out there trying to finish some last-minute reinforcement before the flood came. She saw David among them, shouting instructions, his voice nearly lost in the roar of the wind. For a moment, Leona watched him from afar. The storm's first drops hit her face. Lightning lit up the sky, showing the rough outline of the bridge, the trees swaying wildly and the dark water rising fast. She felt a strange mix of anger and respect. Maybe deep down they both wanted the same thing: safety, balance, something worth keeping alive. She turned back toward her camp as the rain started to pour. Her boots sank into the mud, and her flashlight beam wavered with every step. She didn't know that this would be the last quiet evening before everything changed. Because before dawn, the storm would reach its full fury. And by the next morning, the river would swallow the bridge, her camp, and every line she thought she could draw between herself and the man she swore never to trust. The storm had begun quietly at first. A few dark clouds rolled across the sky and the air felt heavier than usual. By midnight, the rain was falling in sheets, drumming against the tents and trees like 1,000 tiny drums. Leona woke to the sound of the river roaring in the distance. She had spent years in the Amazon and she knew the warning signs. The river would rise fast, and the bridges, already unstable, could collapse under the pressure. She hurried out of her tent, her raincoat soaked instantly. The forest smelled of wet earth and fallen leaves. Her heart pounded as she ran toward her team. Rosa and the other local guides were already trying to secure the equipment and move animals to higher ground. The animals were nervous. Birds flew in frantic circles above, and monkeys chattered loudly from the trees. Leona's mind raced. She knew that the construction site was at serious risk. If the bridge failed, the river could flood not only the animals' habitat but also the path that connected the workers and locals. She grabbed her flashlight and ran toward the river, slipping on the wet soil several times. The rain fell heavier, making it almost impossible to see clearly. When she arrived at the bridge, the situation was worse than she had imagined. The rain had washed away part of the embankment. Wooden supports were bending under the weight of the swollen river. The bridge had tilted dangerously, and water poured beneath it with a deafening roar. Workers shouted instructions, but the storm drowned their voices. David was there in the middle of the chaos. His clothes were soaked, mud covering his boots and pants. He had ropes in his hands, trying to tie a support beam to a stronger post on the riverbank. Leona's heart sank when she saw how close he was to the edge. Every step he took seemed perilous, the water rising higher around his legs. "David!" she called out, but her voice was barely heard over the storm. He looked up, spotting her in the rain. For a moment, their eyes met, and she saw a calm determination there that made her chest tighten. He nodded quickly and focused back on the bridge. Leona didn't know why, but she felt a strange trust in him. Despite everything, he knew what he was doing. She ran closer to help, slipping again in the mud. "Here, take this rope," she shouted, throwing it toward him. David grabbed it just in time, securing it to a post. Together, they worked quickly, tying beams and adjusting ropes. The storm made every movement difficult, but neither of them stopped. They were soaked to the bone, shivering but focused. Leona realized that for the first time she wasn't seeing him as an outsider. She saw someone who understood the land, the river, and the danger, someone who cared. Then came a sudden crack. A beam snapped under the pressure of the rushing water, sending David stumbling backward. Leona lunged toward him instinctively, but the wet ground gave way beneath her. She slipped and fell, hitting her leg against a submerged root. Pain shot through her, sharp and immediate. She tried to stand, but her leg gave out and she slid toward the river's edge. "Leona!" David shouted, rushing toward her, but she couldn't move. Her leg was trapped under a tangle of roots and mud. The water was rising fast, and she could feel it tugging at her shoes. Her flashlight went out, leaving her in near darkness with only the flashes of lightning illuminating the river. Fear gripped her chest. She had faced danger before, but this was different. She was completely helpless. David didn't hesitate. Without thinking about himself, he tied a rope around his waist and anchored it to a tree on the bank. Then he waded into the cold, fast-moving water. Every step was a battle, but he pushed forward, reaching her side. Leona tried to speak, but the words were caught in her throat. The storm drowned everything out, but she could feel him tugging gently on her arm. "Hold on," he shouted. "I've got you." Step by step, he worked to free her leg. She gritted her teeth against the pain, tears mixing with the rain on her face. The water was up to her waist now, cold and merciless. David didn't falter. He pulled, guided her, and finally, after what felt like hours but was only minutes, her leg came free. Leona collapsed into his arms, exhausted and shivering. The river tugged at her once more, but David held her tightly, steadying her against the current. He wrapped a waterproof jacket around her shoulders, trying to warm her. "You're safe now," he said, his voice calm despite the chaos around them. She wanted to protest, to tell him she could walk, that she didn't need help. But the truth was clear. Without him, she would not have survived. She felt a strange, unfamiliar gratitude, mixed with the embarrassment of having to rely on someone she had sworn never to trust. The storm raged on. Lightning illuminated the flooded river, the broken bridge, and the dark trees around them. David kept her close, speaking softly to reassure her, guiding her step by step toward a small rocky ledge above the river. There they could rest safely until the storm passed. Leona's body shook, not just from the cold, but from the realization of how close she had come to losing everything. David built a small fire using dry bark and branches, and she watched him carefully, noticing the patience and care he put into every movement. He cleaned the mud from her wounds, wrapped them gently, and checked her for other injuries. "You don't have to talk," he said when she opened her mouth. "Just rest. You need your strength." She nodded silently, too tired to argue. For hours they sat near the fire, listening to the rain and the river, neither speaking much. She studied him without thinking. The man she had dismissed as an outsider had saved her life. He had put himself at risk without a second thought. And now, in the middle of the storm, she realized that she had been wrong about him. By dawn, the rain had lessened to a steady drizzle. The river was still high, but calmer. Leona was exhausted but alive. David helped her to her feet, supporting her as they moved back toward the path to the village. She could barely walk, but with him by her side, she felt a flicker of hope. As they approached safety, Leona knew something had changed inside her. She had sworn never to rely on a human, but now her life hung on him. And the quiet, brave man who had risked everything to save her had earned her trust in a way she had never expected. For the first time, she wondered if perhaps working together wasn't such a betrayal of her principles after all. Perhaps it was simply what she needed to survive, to continue protecting the forest she loved. And somewhere deep in her heart, she knew that whatever came next, she would never forget this night. The night the storm tested her limits and showed her the courage, kindness, and strength of someone she had refused to trust. The morning light broke through the clouds, painting the forest in muted shades of green and gray. The rain had slowed to a soft drizzle, but the ground was slick and the river still swelled with the storm's memory. Leona's leg ached with every step, and her clothes clung uncomfortably to her skin, soaked through from the hours in the river. She had never felt so weak and dependent in her life. David stayed close beside her, steadying her whenever she slipped. His movements were careful, deliberate, as if he could sense every danger hidden in the mud and rocks. He said little, but his eyes constantly scanned the surroundings. The quiet strength in him gave Leona a strange comfort, even as her pride battled with the reality that she could not have survived the night without him. "Take your time," David said softly, noticing her struggle. "No need to rush," Leona nodded. Her chest heaved, partly from exhaustion and partly from emotion. She didn't trust easily, and she certainly didn't depend on people. But here, in the middle of the forest, she had no choice. The man she had dismissed as an outsider had saved her life, and for the first time, she wondered if she had been wrong to judge him so quickly. They moved slowly along the narrow path leading away from the river. Fallen branches and debris blocked parts of the trail, and Leona had to step carefully to avoid twisting her ankle again. David would reach ahead, testing the ground with a sturdy branch before signaling for her to follow. Sometimes he offered his hand and she would take it, leaning on him without words. It felt strange, but it also felt safe. As they walked, the forest began to wake. Birds returned to the treetops, cautiously calling to one another. Monkeys peeked from branches, watching the humans pass by. The animals seemed to sense that danger had passed, but that the land was still cautious. Leona felt a deep connection to them in that moment, and a new awareness of the man walking beside her. He had saved not only her life, but also, indirectly, the balance of the forest by helping her survive. The path grew steeper, and the mud deeper. Leona's leg gave a sudden sharp pain, forcing her to collapse onto a mossy rock. David immediately crouched beside her, concern etched across his face. "Can you stand?" he asked. I think so," she said through gritted teeth. David nodded. "Lean on me. Step slowly, one at a time." With his arm around her waist, they continued. Every movement was a struggle, but step by step they climbed. Leona could feel her muscles burning, her energy nearly spent. But David's calm presence kept her focused. He didn't rush, didn't complain, and didn't make her feel weak. In his steadiness, she found a strange kind of strength. After several hours, they reached a small clearing above the river. The storm had left behind broken branches and puddles, but it was safer than the rushing water below. David guided her to a large rock and helped her sit. "You've done well," he said quietly. "Just a little farther and we can reach the village. You'll be safe there." Leona exhaled, trying to push down the surge of relief and gratitude. She had survived the worst of the storm, but it was more than survival now. She felt a bond forming, one she hadn't expected. This was not trust born from words, but from actions, from seeing someone risk everything without hesitation. As they rested, David pulled a small water bottle from his pack and offered it to her. "Drink, you need energy." She took it, grateful but silent. Their eyes met for a moment. There was no need for words. The storm, the river, and the forest had spoken for them. In that quiet moment, Leona realized that survival had changed something inside her. She had sworn never to rely on a human, yet here she was, relying on him completely. The path ahead was tricky. Trees had fallen across the trail, and the soil was unstable. Leona struggled again, but David's steady hand guided her around each obstacle. Occasionally she caught him looking at her with a mixture of concern and patience, and she felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the sun or the rain. Hours passed slowly. By midday, the village came into view. Small huts nestled among the trees, smoke rising gently from their chimneys. Relief washed over Leona, but she remained cautious. This was not the end. The forest was unpredictable, and one wrong step could undo everything. David helped her down the final slope, carefully navigating around puddles and mud. Villagers began to notice them, some running forward to offer assistance. Leona felt a moment of embarrassment mixed with gratitude. She had always been strong and independent, but today she had relied on someone else to survive. And yet she was alive, more alive than she had felt in years. Once they reached solid ground, David sat beside her on a bench made from a fallen log. The village healer was called over, and she quickly examined Leona's leg and treated minor cuts and bruises. Throughout the process, David stayed close, quietly assisting when needed but never intruding. Leona watched him, feeling a mixture of respect and something more she couldn't yet name. After the healer finished, Leona finally spoke. "Thank you," she said softly. I couldn't have made it without you." David shrugged modestly. "You would have found a way. But I'm glad I could help." She shook her head. "No, you risked yourself for me. That's not something I forget easily." For a moment they sat in silence, listening to the distant river and the soft sounds of the recovering forest. The storm had passed, leaving behind damage but also a sense of renewal. Leona realized that this experience had shifted something inside her, not just about the forest but about people. Trust, she had thought, was impossible. But trust built through action, through courage and care, was something different. David finally spoke, breaking the silence. "You're stronger than you know. I've seen you work with these animals, with your team. You never give up even when it seems impossible." Leona smiled faintly. "I thought strength meant doing everything alone. Today I learned it can also mean letting someone help you when you need it most." The words felt heavy with meaning. The forest, the storm, the river, all had shown her limits she didn't know existed. And yet in those limits she had found courage, resilience, and an unexpected ally. As evening approached, the village prepared a small shelter for them. Leona leaned back, exhausted but alive, and thought about the man beside her. She had sworn never to ally with a human. Yet here he was, steady and kind. a lifeline she had never expected. She realized that life sometimes forced people into situations where old promises and prejudices no longer mattered. Survival was not just about strength or skill. It was also about connection, trust, and courage. And David had shown her all three. For the first time in her life, Leona allowed herself to believe that perhaps humans and nature could coexist, and that sometimes the right human could become more than an outsider. He could become a partner, a protector, and in some quiet way a friend she could rely on. The night fell softly over the village. The storm was gone, replaced by a calm, starry sky. Leona closed her eyes for a moment, letting the events of the day sink in. The forest was alive, the river still flowed, and her life, fragile, precious, and changed, had been saved by the one person she had never expected to trust. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but for now she felt something she had never felt before. Hope. Night fell softly over the village, leaving the forest bathed in moonlight. The storm had passed, but the ground was still wet, and the air smelled fresh and earthy. Leona sat beside the small fire David had managed to rebuild, her soaked clothes slowly drying in the gentle heat. The sounds of the forest returned slowly, the chirping of crickets, the rustle of leaves in the wind, and the distant call of an owl. She was exhausted, her body sore from the fall and the long walk to the village, but her mind raced with thoughts she could not quiet. She had always believed she had to rely only on herself. That dependence was a weakness. Yet tonight, in the safety of the village and beside the man who had saved her life, she felt a strange comfort she could not ignore. David sat quietly, polishing a small knife he had used to cut branches and make the fire more stable. His movements were calm and precise, every action deliberate. He seemed at ease despite the chaos of the past 2 days. Leona watched him in silence, noticing the care he gave to even the smallest tasks. She had never seen anyone act with such patience in the face of danger. "You're quiet tonight," David said, looking up at her. Leona shrugged. "Just thinking," she replied. "About the forest?" He asked gently. "About everything," she said. She paused, trying to find the right words. "I've spent my life protecting this place. I've seen people destroy it without care. I swore I would never trust anyone who came here, no matter what they said." David nodded, listening. "It makes sense," he said softly. "I know it's hard to trust. I've been in new places like this before. You never know who will help and who will cause more harm." Leona studied him for a long moment. She could see the honesty in his eyes, the quiet determination to do what was right. For the first time, she wondered if there was more to him than she had realized. He had come here as part of a company that could harm the forest, yet he had risked himself to save her. That simple act had changed everything. "Why did you help me?" she asked finally, her voice low. David paused. He set the knife down and looked into the fire. "Because it was the right thing to do," he said. "I couldn't leave you there. I couldn't watch someone die when I could help. It doesn't matter where you come from or who I am. At that moment, you needed help and I gave it." Leona felt a warmth in her chest she had not expected. She had always thought that words could be lies, that promises could be broken, but his actions had spoken louder than any words ever could. She realized that trust was not something given lightly, but something earned through courage and care. The fire crackled, and the two of them sat in silence, listening to the night. Leona felt her body relaxing for the first time in hours. The ache in her leg was still there, but it no longer seemed unbearable. She could feel David's steady presence beside her, and it gave her a sense of security she had never known. After a while, David spoke again. "You know," he said quietly, "I didn't come here to save the forest alone. I came here to do my job, but I also wanted to learn. I wanted to understand the people and the land that make it so special. I think I've learned more from you than I expected." Leona turned to look at him. There was no arrogance in his voice, no sense of pride, just honesty. "You've learned?" she asked, a hint of a smile forming on her lips. "Yes," he said. "I've learned that protecting something is about more than rules or plans. It's about care. It's about patience. And it's about understanding the consequences of every action." Leona felt a deep respect for him growing inside her. She had always believed she had to carry the weight of the forest alone. But now she saw that someone else could share that weight, if they were willing to do it with honesty and dedication. The night grew darker, and the firelight flickered against their faces. Leona could feel the tension of the past days easing, replaced by a quiet sense of connection. She realized that she had been wrong to judge him solely by the company he kept. David had shown her that a person could come from an unexpected place and still act with courage, integrity, and kindness. "David," she said softly, I don't know how to say this, but thank you for everything, for not giving up, for being here." He looked at her, and for a moment the seriousness in his eyes softened into something warmer. "You don't have to thank me," he said. "I would do it again if I had to. But I'm glad you're safe. That's what matters." Leona nodded. She didn't need more words. The fire, the forest, and the quiet night said enough. She felt a connection forming, one built on trust, courage, and shared experience. It was not friendship in the ordinary sense, nor was it anything she could define yet. It was simply a bond born of survival and respect. A bond that neither the storm nor the forest could undo. As the hours passed, they talked quietly about the forest, the animals, and the work that still needed to be done. David asked questions with genuine curiosity, and Leona answered with patience, noticing that he listened intently. He seemed to care about understanding, not just following instructions. That small difference made her see him not as an outsider, but as someone who could truly care for the forest she loved. The night stretched on, and the rain returned lightly, tapping on the leaves above. They moved closer to the fire, sharing warmth without words. Leona felt a sense of safety she had not known she could feel with another human. She realized that trust could exist even in unexpected places, and that someone who had once been a stranger could become a protector, an ally and a quiet presence she could rely on. By the time dawn approached, the forest was calm again. Birds began to sing, and the smell of wet earth filled the air. Leona looked at David sitting across from her and felt a deep gratitude, not just for saving her life, but for showing her a different way to see humans, one that included courage, care, and honesty. For the first time in her life, she understood that she did not have to face everything alone. Trust, when given to the right person, could be a source of strength, not weakness, and David had earned that trust completely. The first light of morning revealed the path they would take to return to safety. Leona stood slowly, testing her leg. The ache remained, but she could walk. David offered his arm, and she accepted it, feeling a sense of calm and reassurance she had never expected. Together they prepared to move forward, leaving the night of fear and survival behind. And as they walked through the forest, Leona carried with her a new understanding. Sometimes, life forces people into connections they never imagined. And sometimes the person you swore you would never rely on becomes the one who helps you survive, and the one who changes the way you see the world forever. The first light of dawn filtered softly through the trees, casting the forest in gentle gold and green. The storm had passed entirely now, leaving only the smell of wet earth and fresh leaves. Leona felt a strange mixture of relief and exhaustion. Her leg was sore, her clothes were soaked and muddy, but she was alive, and more than that, she had learned something important about trust, courage, and the unexpected kindness of others. David was already awake, adjusting the small backpack he had packed for the walk back to the village center. He looked up as Leona stirred. "Good morning," he said softly, his calm voice carrying a sense of steady reassurance. Leona offered a small smile. "Morning," she replied. Her voice was hoarse, but her spirit felt lighter than it had in days. She pushed herself to stand, testing her leg carefully. Pain shot through it, but it was manageable. She realized that she had grown stronger simply by surviving the storm, by relying on someone else when she had no other choice. David stepped closer, offering his arm. "Shall we go?" he asked. Leona hesitated for a moment, then took it. She felt the warmth of his support and the quiet steadiness of his presence. Together, they began to walk along the muddy forest path, moving slowly but steadily. Every step reminded her of the events of the past days. The storm, the rising river, the near disaster, and the courage that had kept them alive. As they walked, the forest came alive around them. Birds sang from the treetops, monkeys peeked from branches, and small animals scurried among the undergrowth. The forest seemed to celebrate their survival, moving gracefully from the chaos of the storm to a renewed calm. Leona felt a deep sense of gratitude, not just for her life, but for the chance to continue protecting the land she loved. David glanced at her, noticing her quiet reflection. "You know," he said softly, I've seen a lot of forests, but none as alive as this one. You've done an amazing job keeping it safe." Leona shook her head gently. "I couldn't have done it alone," she said. "Not these past 2 days. Not during the storm." She paused, unsure if she should speak more. I underestimated you." David's expression softened. "We all do sometimes," he said. "But what matters is that we learn, and that we help when we can." Leona looked at him and realized that she had learned more than just how to survive the storm. She had learned that courage and kindness could come from unexpected people. David had arrived as an outsider, someone she had sworn never to trust. And yet he had proven that trust could be earned through actions, not words. The path led them gradually downward toward the village. Leona's steps grew steadier as the incline lessened, and she began to feel a sense of hope she had not felt in days. She looked around at the forest, at the trees bending gently in the morning breeze, and at the clear sky above. Life had returned to the forest, and in that return she found a reflection of her own resilience. As they neared the village, villagers came forward to greet them. Their expressions were a mixture of relief and curiosity. They had heard of the storm and the rising river, and they knew how dangerous it could have been. Leona felt a quiet pride in her team and in David, who had guided her safely through every obstacle. A few children ran ahead, pointing excitedly at the river and the broken bridge, which now stood calm but damaged in the morning light. Leona smiled faintly. She had spent so much time worrying about protecting the animals and the land, but she realized that survival and care were as much about people as about the forest. David stayed close beside her as they reached the village center. The local healer had prepared a warm shelter, and Leona was helped inside. She sank onto a bench, exhausted but filled with relief. The healer inspected her leg again, checking the bruises and scrapes, and nodded approvingly. "You will be fine," she said. "You are lucky, but your strength helped you survive." Leona nodded, thinking about everything that had happened. Strength had taken many forms over the past days. The physical strength to climb and walk, the mental strength to remain calm under pressure, and the emotional strength to trust someone she had once doubted. She realized that trust too was a kind of strength, and David had shown her how powerful it could be. David sat beside her, silently offering support without words. Leona felt a sense of gratitude welling up inside her. I owe you," she said quietly. "You owe me nothing," he replied with a small smile. "I'm just glad you're safe." For a long moment they sat in silence, listening to the sounds of the village, the distant river, and the returning life of the forest. Leona felt a new understanding growing inside her. Life sometimes forced people into situations they never imagined, and sometimes the people they swore they could never rely on became the ones who changed everything. She thought about the storm, the river, and the dangerous bridge. She thought about how David had never hesitated to help, how he had guided her through the mud and water, and how he had stayed calm when everything seemed impossible. His courage and care had been steady and quiet, but it had saved her life. And in that realization, Leona felt a deep sense of respect and connection. As the morning passed, Leona began to plan for the future. The bridge would need repairs, the forest needed continued protection, and her team would require guidance and support. But now she felt a renewed sense of confidence. She had survived not only the storm but also the fear and uncertainty that came with it, and she had learned that she did not have to face everything alone. David offered to stay and help with the repairs, and Leona found herself accepting without hesitation. She realized that working together did not weaken her principles. It strengthened them. Together they could protect the forest, care for the animals, and support the local community. The experience had shown her that trust, when earned, could be a source of power and hope. As they walked together through the village, Leona noticed the small gestures that had once seemed insignificant. David carried supplies without being asked, checked on the villagers, and helped coordinate efforts quietly. Every action reinforced the trust she had begun to feel. She had sworn never to ally with a human, yet here she was walking beside someone who had proven himself worthy of that alliance. By midday, the village and forest had begun to settle into a new rhythm. The animals cautiously returned to their usual paths. The workers began repairs on the bridge, and Leona felt a sense of accomplishment she had never expected. She turned to David, who was quietly organizing tools for the next project. "Thank you," she said again, this time with a genuine smile. "For staying, for helping, for everything." David looked at her, his expression calm and honest. "You would have done the same for me," he said. "We make a good team." Leona nodded, feeling a warmth she had never felt before. She had faced danger, fear, and uncertainty, and she had discovered something more valuable than survival. She had discovered trust, courage, and the quiet strength of human connection. As the sun rose higher, casting a warm light across the forest and village, Leona realized that life would never be the same. She had once believed she could face everything alone, that trusting another human was weakness, but now she understood that true strength came from courage, care, and the willingness to trust when it mattered most. And as she walked beside David, planning the next steps to protect the forest and support the community, she felt a deep sense of hope and gratitude. Life had tested her, and through that test, she had found not only survival but also a new understanding of trust, partnership, and the quiet, steady power of someone who cares. Leona swore she would never forget this experience, and she swore she would never forget the man who had shown her that sometimes the person you never expect can change everything.